A narcissist rarely moves on quickly because their feelings have simply faded, because grief and attachment do not disappear on command, not even for them. What looks like speed is almost always a substitution, one source of validation swapped for another before the absence has time to register. The urgency is not affection for someone new. It is an emergency response to a supply line that has just been cut. Underneath the appearance of ease, there is a structure working overtime to outrun a collapse it cannot afford to feel. Once you understand what that structure is protecting, the fast rebound stops looking like indifference and starts looking like exactly what it is. Because here is what almost no one tells you about the person who left you for someone else within weeks, sometimes days. They are not choosing that person the way a healthy person chooses a partner. They are reaching for the nearest available source of regulation, the way a person in freefall reaches for anything solid. It does not matter if the object is right. It only matters that it is there. And this is the part that confuses people most, because it looks like the opposite of grief. It looks like triumph. It looks like a person who has traded up, who is thriving, who has found something better before you even had time to catch your breath. But what you are actually watching is a nervous system in crisis, dressed up in a new outfit and photographed at a nice restaurant. To understand why this happens, you have to understand what a relationship was actually providing them, because it was never what you thought it was. You believed you were building intimacy, a shared life, a mutual investment in each other's well-being. They were experiencing something closer to a regulatory mechanism. Every reaction you gave them, your attention, your forgiveness, your patience, even your hurt, became a kind of input that told their nervous system it was safe, important, and in control. This is not a metaphor. Their internal sense of worth was never generated from the inside the way it is for most people. It had to be manufactured externally, moment by moment, through another person's engagement. When that engagement was present, they felt grounded. When it disappeared, the grounding disappeared with it because there was no internal structure holding it up in the first place. So when you left or when you were the one discarded, what they lost was not a partner in the way you understand loss. What they lost was the mechanism itself. And a mechanism in failure does not sit quietly and grieve. It searches frantically for a replacement part. This is why the timeline of a narcissistic rebound looks so different from a normal one. A person recovering from heartbreak in an ordinary sense usually needs time, distance, a period of feeling the absence before they can imagine filling it with someone new. A narcissist cannot tolerate that gap. The gap itself is the danger. Sitting inside an empty room with no one reflecting their significance back to them is not sadness to them. It is closer to a kind of psychic emergency, and they will do almost anything to end it quickly. This is where the substitution happens, and it happens fast because speed is the entire point. The new person does not need to be a good match. They do not need to share values or humor or a compatible pace of life. What they need to provide immediately is attention, admiration, a gaze that says, "You are important, you are impressive, you are the center of this room." That is the only qualification that matters in the first weeks of a rebound, and it is why the person they land on next can look from the outside almost interchangeable with a dozen other people who could have filled the same role. The specific human being matters far less than the function that human being is being asked to perform. And this explains something that devastates people who are freshly out of one of these relationships. You watch them post pictures, smiling, arm around someone new, looking lighter than they ever looked with you. And your mind tells a story that says they never loved you at all, that you meant nothing, that replacing you was effortless because you were replaceable. But effortless is not what is happening underneath that photo. What is happening is a person who cannot sit with absence for even a single day, performing contentment in front of an audience they are terrified is still watching. Confidence does not need to be photographed constantly. Confidence does not need an audience at midnight. What you are looking at is not evidence of ease. It is evidence of how unbearable the alternative would be. There is a difference, and it matters, between someone processing an ending and someone outrunning one. Processing requires contact with the loss. It requires the uncomfortable work of feeling what is missing, sitting with the specific shape of what that person provided, and slowly building an internal capacity to hold that absence without collapsing. This is difficult, even for emotionally secure people. It is something closer to impossible for someone whose entire self-concept depends on a steady stream of external proof that they matter. So instead of processing, they substitute. They find a new source before the old one has finished leaving the room. And because the substitution happens so fast, they never actually experience the loss. They skip it entirely, the way a person might step over a hole in the floor rather than look down into it. This is also why the new relationship so often mirrors the shape of the one that just ended, sometimes in ways that are almost eerie. The same dynamics repeat, the same pace of escalation, the same intensity of early declarations, the same performance of a soulmate connection that arrives within weeks rather than developing over years. This is not because they have found a person who is uncannily similar to you. It is because the process is not really about the person at all. It is a template being reapplied, the same regulatory function being asked of a different body, the same hollow being handed to someone new to fill. If you look closely at their pattern across relationships, you will often see the architecture of the beginning repeating itself with startling consistency, even while the details, the name, the face, the story change each time. Think about what this means practically, because it is easy to hear this in the abstract and still feel the sting of watching it happen in real time. The new partner will hear almost the exact same language you once heard. They will be told they are different from everyone else, that this connection feels unlike anything the narcissist has experienced before, that they finally understand what love is supposed to feel like. None of this is a lie in the way you might assume. In the moment it is said, it often feels true to them, because the flood of validation a new source provides really does produce something that feels, internally, like relief, like clarity, like arrival. The problem is not sincerity. The problem is durability. What feels like a revelation in week 3 has, in almost every prior relationship, curdled into disappointment by month 6, and there is no reason embedded in the new relationship itself that would prevent the same arc from repeating, because the arc was never determined by the partner. It was determined by the internal system doing the same thing it always does when it receives fresh supply. This is part of why watching a narcissist's rebound from the outside can feel so destabilizing to the person who was left behind. You are comparing your years of history, your accumulated knowledge of who they actually are beneath the performance, against someone else's first few weeks of the highlight reel. It is not a fair comparison, not because you are inferior in some way, but because you are looking at two entirely different phases of the same predictable cycle. You are standing in the wreckage of a structure that has already run its full course. They are standing at the very beginning of a structure that has not yet had time to show its cracks. Time is the only variable that separates what you know from what the new partner does not yet know. Existing research on rebound behavior actually supports what many people sense intuitively watching this unfold. Studies suggest people who display patterns associated with rapid rebound relationships often display more behaviors associated with narcissistic or self-centered tendencies, frequently using the new relationship as a form of ego management rather than genuine connection. In other words, this is not simply a common assumption people make about narcissists in the aftermath of a breakup. It is a documented pattern, one where the rebound functions less as a new beginning and more as a coping mechanism designed to avoid the discomfort of processing what just ended. Now, here's where it gets more layered, because the speed is not only about avoiding grief, it is also about control. Moving on quickly, visibly, and dramatically sends a message, whether or not they would ever admit this consciously. It says, "You did not break me." It says, "I am already fine, already better, already desired by someone new. This performance is aimed at you as much as it is aimed at themselves, because your reaction, your hurt, your confusion, your jealousy, all of it becomes another form of supply. Even negative attention confirms that they still occupy space in your emotional world, and that confirmation matters more to them than almost anything else you could offer. If they can convince you that they are thriving without you, they have accomplished something they consider a victory. Not because they feel triumphant inside, because the performance of triumph is the only kind of triumph available to them. This is also why so many people describe a strange, disorienting grief that has nothing to do with wanting the narcissist back and everything to do with watching them seem to suffer zero consequences. You are the one lying awake, replaying conversations, the one questioning your own memory, the one grieving a version of the relationship that may never have been real in the way you experienced it. And they appear to be living a highlight reel. This asymmetry is not a reflection of who loved more, or who is stronger, or who deserved the relationship to work. It is a reflection of two completely different internal architectures processing the same ending in fundamentally different ways. You are built to feel loss and move through it. They are built to avoid feeling it at almost any cost. And the rebound is simply the most visible tool they have for that avoidance. Underneath the new relationship, something else is happening that rarely gets discussed, and it is the part that explains why these rebounds so often collapse just as quickly as they began. Because the new partner cannot actually fill what is missing, not in any lasting way. They can provide attention for a while. They can mirror admiration back convincingly for a few weeks or months. But the emptiness that made the narcissist need a replacement so urgently in the first place was never about you specifically, and it will not be resolved by anyone else specifically either. It is a structural feature, not a situational one. So the initial high of the new relationship, the intensity, the declarations, the constant contact, eventually runs into the same wall the previous relationship ran into. The new person stops being enough. Not because they did anything wrong, but because enough was never actually achievable in the way the narcissist needed it to be. This is where the cycle either repeats or deepens. In many cases, the same devaluation you experienced begins again with the new partner, sometimes on a faster timeline because the underlying urgency, the fear of the void, has not lessened at all. If anything, it has intensified because now there are two failed sources of supply in the recent past instead of one, and each failure adds pressure to the search for whatever comes next. What looks from the outside like a person effortlessly gliding from relationship to relationship is underneath a person accelerating toward the exact collapse they are trying to outrun. There is something important in this for you to sit with, because it changes what you are actually witnessing when you see them move on so fast. You are not watching proof that you are unlovable, replaceable, or insufficient. You are watching a structural response to abandonment that would happen with almost anyone in your position, because the response was never about you. It was about their inability to tolerate an empty room. And the person filling that room now is not living the fantasy you might imagine from the outside. They are auditioning for a role that no one can actually perform long-term, because the role requires being an infinite, uninterrupted source of validation for someone whose need for it has no ceiling. If you are in the position of watching this happen, whether it is a former partner, a former friend, or a family member who discarded you and rushed towards someone new within days, there is a specific kind of clarity available to you here that is worth naming directly. The speed was never a measurement of your worth. It was a measurement of their capacity to sit with loss, and that capacity was limited long before you ever entered the picture. Whatever void existed in them existed before you, and it will continue to exist in every relationship that follows, regardless of how convincing the beginning looks from a distance. This does not mean their new relationship is destined to fail on any particular timeline, and it is not helpful to spend your energy waiting for it to collapse as a form of vindication. What is more useful and more available to you right now is understanding the difference between what you are doing and what they are doing. You are allowed to feel the absence. You are allowed to sit with the discomfort of missing something that was never fully what it appeared to be. That discomfort is not weakness. It is the beginning of an internal capacity they may never develop, the capacity to hold loss without immediately needing to replace it with something or someone else. It also helps to notice what tends to happen to your own thinking in the weeks after watching a rebound like this unfold, because there is a particular trap that catches almost everyone who goes through it. The mind starts constructing a comparison test. It starts asking what the new person has that you did not, what they are doing differently, what quality or behavior finally worked where yours apparently did not. This question feels productive, like it might yield an answer that protects you from repeating whatever mistake you believe you made. But the question itself rests on a false premise, because it assumes the outcome was ever about a quality you were missing, rather than a structural need that no quality could have satisfied. Chasing that comparison will not produce clarity. It will produce an endless audit of yourself against a moving target, because the target was never fixed in the first place. The narcissist was not searching for someone better. They were searching for anyone available, and availability is not a compliment to whoever happens to be standing there when the need arises. There is also a quieter, more practical layer to this worth naming, because it changes how you might choose to engage, or not engage, with information about their new life. Checking their social media, asking mutual contacts how the new relationship is going, tracking the relationship's apparent milestones, all of this keeps you anchored to their timeline instead of your own. It keeps the comparison test running in the background even when you are consciously trying to move forward. The version of you that heals fastest is usually the version that stops measuring its progress against someone else's performance, because their performance was never designed to be measured honestly in the first place. It was designed to be watched. And this is worth saying plainly, because it tends to get lost in the noise of watching someone else's highlight reel. Processing a loss slowly, painfully, honestly is not the losing move here. It is the only path that leads somewhere real. The fast rebound does not lead anywhere. It leads to another version of the same room, another person standing in for the same missing structure, another countdown to the same collapse. You are not behind them in some race to heal. You are doing something they may be constitutionally unable to do at all, which is to actually feel what happened and come out the other side changed by it, rather than simply distracted from it. If any part of what I just described matched something you have lived through, watching someone disappear into a new relationship before you had time to even process what ended, I want you to know that reaction you are having, the confusion, the anger, the strange grief for something that was never fully real, none of that means you are irrational or stuck. It means you are processing an ending the way a person with a genuine internal capacity for connection processes an ending, which is slower and harder than what you are watching them perform. Stay with that process. It is the one that actually leads somewhere. If this resonated with you, subscribe, because we go deep into these patterns every week, patterns that most people spend years trying to name on their own before they ever hear someone describe it out loud the way you just did. And if you have watched a narcissist rush into something new after leaving you, or after you finally left them, tell me about it in the comments. Because there is a very specific kind of relief in realizing you are not the only one who has stood at the edge of that particular kind of confusion and wondered what you did wrong, when the honest answer was that you did nothing wrong at all. There is one more layer to this worth understanding, because it explains why some of these rebounds do last, at least on the surface, for longer than anyone expects. Occasionally, the narcissist finds someone whose own patterns interlock with theirs in a way that stabilizes the performance for a while. A partner who is unusually tolerant of being devalued, who provides consistent admiration without asking for much in return, who does not challenge the narrative being constructed. In those cases, The relationship can appear durable from the outside for months or even years. And people watching from a distance sometimes use that duration as evidence that it must be real this time, that maybe you truly were the problem after all. But durability is not the same as depth. A relationship can last a long time and still be functioning as a life support system for someone who has never learned to survive without one. Longevity tells you about compatibility of function. It does not tell you about the presence of the connection you once believed you were building. What matters most in the end is not how long their next relationship lasts or how convincing it looks in photographs. What matters is what you do with the time you have now on your side of the story, where the healing is actually real because it is actually being felt. The version of you that comes out the other side of this, having sat with the loss instead of sprinting from it, will have something they may never build in themselves, a self that does not require someone else's gaze to feel whole. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the entire thing.